Hello everyone. Let's find out where Prophet Abraham was from together from the Quran. Verse number 258 of chapter 2. It says, did you notice, did you consider the one who argued with Abraham about his Lord? Because Allah had given him kingship, kingdom. So we know from this verse that Abraham at 2,000 years BCE, 2,000 years before Christ, he was living in a city, in a country, in a nation that had a king. They had a king ruling them. They were civilized. They had a civilization. They were not tribal. They were not city-states. It was actually a nation that had a king over them. Verse number 74 of chapter 6 tells us, when Abraham told his father, and then the verse tells us the name of Abraham's father as Azar. It's very important. Keep in mind that the Quran does not name many of the prophets. In fact, it doesn't even name the disciples of Prophet Muhammad. And the only person in the Quran from the time of Prophet Muhammad that has been named in it is his adopted son Zayd. Other than him, no one else has been named in the Quran. So when you see the name of someone in the Quran mentioned, you have to know that it's very, very important. There's a reason why our Creator has put that name in there, because that name is an identifier, is an address, is telling us, teaching us something. It's even more important in this case, in case of Azar, because Azar is actually an idol worshiper. He's not a righteous person, he's an idol worshiper. So why is Allah, our Creator, naming him and mentioning him in the Quran? The name Azar. So keep that in mind. The name Azar is very important. We're going to come back to it. Verse number 76, 77, 78, and the rest of this chapter talk about the people in that nation, in that country. So it seems like in that nation that Abraham lived, people had various religions, various beliefs. Some people were worshiping idols, as I showed to you from the verse that he was talking about his father. But then there were some other people who were worshiping the stars. And there were some other people who were worshiping the moon, Al-Qamar. And there were some other people who were worshiping the Shams, or the sun. And all of them were coexisting peacefully. There was no civil war. There was nothing like that. And Abraham is traveling around that country, that nation, those people. And he's actually entering into some sort of a dialogue, some sort of a debate, very friendly debate with them when it comes to the sun, when it comes to the moon, when it comes to the stars, and when it comes to the idols. So he's doing that in a very peaceful manner. He's doing dialogue, he's doing debate with them, and he's trying to show them that the actual true Creator, true God, is the one who created the heavens and the earth. And interestingly, nobody is really doing anything against him. Nobody is punishing him for that. Nobody is putting him in prison for that. So that tells you that at the time of Abraham, in that country, in that kingdom, there was true freedom of religion. There was true, I want to emphasize that, there was true freedom of religion. Everybody was doing their own thing, and Abraham was going amongst them and arguing and debating with them, and he was fine. Nobody was persecuting him up until Abraham starts breaking the idols. So how does Abraham goes about doing that? Chapter 21 explains that to us. I'm not going to go over it. It's pretty long. But what happens is that Abraham advises them not to do that and promises them. It says, and by Allah, I have a plan, by God, by our Creator, I have a plan for your idols after you go away and turn your backs. So what is this telling us? This verse number 57 of chapter 21 tells us that the people of this nation, the people of this kingdom, had a festival, had a ceremony during which they would leave the city. They would leave town, they would leave their houses, and they would go outside, they would go outdoors. So the city, the town, the village was completely empty, so no one was in it. And that festival, that ceremony provided a window that day during which people left town and the city became empty, provided a window for Abraham to go to the main place of worship in the city, inside the city, and break all of them except for the big ones amongst them. So one thing you should know, this day where people leave their houses must be at a time when the weather is neither too hot nor too cold. So the weather has to be very pleasant at that time of the year. It must not be too cold and it must not be too hot. So it cannot be in the winter and it cannot be in the summer either. But the chapter gets even more interesting. If you go to verse number 59, when the people come back, they start asking who has done this. And they say, we have heard a young person talking about them, and his name is Ibrahim. Anywhere else in the world at that time, they probably would have captured Abraham and they would have killed him. They would have stoned him to death, or they would have beheaded him, or they would have killed him. Even as of today, if you go to Middle East and insult their ideology, their religious ideology, they consider very sacred, they're just going to capture you and kill you. There's not much that you can do. However, in this nation, in this kingdom, that's not what happens. So they must have had, this civilization must have had a pretty sophisticated judicial system that was based on some elements of justice and fairness. Bring him before the eyes of all the people so that they may bear witness. So they don't put him to death immediately. The king does not intervene and say, oh, just go kill him. Like what it is right now in many Middle Eastern countries, the justice system, the judiciary gets involved and they talk, they consult with each other, and the verdict is that we have to go capture him. We have to bring him in front of all the people so that all of them can witness and we can have testimony to see who has witnessed it, to see if we have testimony against him. And then they bring him and they ask him, have you done this to our gods, O Abraham? And again, verse number 63, if you see another element of that sophistication in the fact that they start a debate with Abraham. It's not that we're going to kill you or anything. They start a logical conversation, a reasonable conversation and debate with Abraham. Abraham says that no, the big one amongst them did that. And they have this back and forth, and they feel a little bit confounded and with shame as well during the conversation. So they feel the guilt. So Abraham, in that debate, in that conversation, during that trial, a very fair and nice trial that he is provided with. And I can assure you that's exactly what Abraham was aiming for, was shooting for. He knew the judicial system. He knew the day that these people are going to be outside the town. He went, broke the idols, and he knew how the judicial system of that kingdom worked. So he actually wanted an audience with the entire people of that kingdom, of that nation. He wanted all of them to gather so he can talk to them. Abraham is an extremely smart person. He literally set them up for this public debate, public conversation through this judiciary trial system that this nation had, which is really nice when you learn it, when you read about it in the Quran. As I mentioned, Abraham was free to debate, to do everything he wanted to do. However, in that system, in that culture, in that civilization, it was not okay for you to go attack the places of worship, just like we have in America, in the West, in most of the world, most of the civilized world right now. You can argue, you can talk about everything, but you cannot go attack the church, you cannot go attack the mosque, you cannot go attack the synagogue. That is not allowed. But how in this case, Abraham had actually attacked the place of worship, destroyed the idols, so obviously the government had to do something about him. So the verdict is that burn him and protect and support your gods. But the question you should ask yourself is that why did they choose fire? Why did they want to burn him? They could have executed him. They could have hanged him. They could have beheaded him. They could have killed him with other methods. Why did they choose fire? In fact, if you do research, you see that it's extremely, extremely rare in the Middle East for the past several thousand years to do that, except for one country, except for one nation, that they actually have a very huge focus. They had, I should say, before Islam, they had huge focus on fire and its ability to purify and distinguish between good and evil. So they considered this nation, they considered the fire as a means of purification that would destroy evil. Now, we're going to come back to it, and I'm going to talk to you about it more. And of course, we know what happens, that Allah, Yahweh, our Creator, commands the fire to be cool and a means of safety and safe, basically safe to Prophet Abraham. So Prophet Abraham's hands are not tied or anything. He's actually in there in the fire. It must have been a huge fire in a controlled environment in front of all the people, and people were watching, and Prophet Abraham is inside this fire, safe and sound. And verse number 71 tells us that Allah saves Prophet Abraham and his wife Sarah and Prophet Lot and also his wife from that place, that nation, that kingdom within which they were living, and commands them to migrate towards the Holy Land. Where is Prophet Abraham from? The name Azar that I mentioned is actually a very, very important clue to this story. The name Azar is an ancient Iranian name. Of course, the name Iran, the country of Iran, did not exist back then, but there were two big kingdoms over there at 2000 BC. One of them was the kingdom of Elam, or the Elamite, and the other one were the Medes. So there were two kingdoms back then that we know of. So the name Azar is an Iranian name from that area. And interestingly, can you guess what the name Azar means? It means fire. So the meaning of the name Azar is fire, or fire temple. And actually, even as of today, the name Azar is the name of the 9th month of the year, which is equivalent to the month of Dhul Qa'dah. But what about the day that people left their houses? What day is that? Which culture does that? Let me tell you, as someone who grew up in this culture myself, I'm very familiar with this, because this is a culture I grew up with, and this is what I did. Every year, in the 13th day of the first month, which is the first month of spring, the month that they call in Iran Farvardin, we would, and even as of today, people do that. We would go out to celebrate a nature's day, what Iranians call as Sinzdah Bedar. It means 13 outdoor. Sinzdah Bedar means 13 outdoor. So basically, during the 13th day of the first month of spring, the Iranians, for thousands of years, what they do is that you're supposed to leave your house, leave your town, go outdoors to the nature, to the woods, and enjoy that day with your family. You have to be outside. So imagine, obviously, nowadays the cities are much bigger. Back then the cities were much smaller. So basically everyone would leave town and the entire town would become empty. So now you know that Prophet Abraham, during the 13th day of the first month of spring, broke the idols in what is known today as Iran. But what about the fire? Prophet Abraham was in fire and he was safe. Interestingly, again, that's another ancient festival that has been happening in Iran for thousands of years. They call it Charshambeh Suri. Charshambeh Suri means scarlet or festive Wednesday. What is it? It's an Iranian ancient festival of the fire celebrated on the eve of the last Wednesday of the year, and it is of ancient Zoroastrian origin. But during this ceremony, people collect brushwood in an open, unrestricted outdoor area prior to the festival's commencement at sunset, and they basically jump over the flames. You basically, again, as a kid, I have done this many times. You kind of jump over the fires and you wish and you hope that you don't catch fire. So no one knows the origin, no one knows how long this has been going on. It's an ancient ceremony that has lasted many civilizations and thousands of years. But now we know what it is. This is probably the time when the judiciary system in the kingdom that existed back then in current day Iran put Abraham in fire, and he came out of it safe and sound. And this is a picture so you can see that. This is how you just have flames of fire and people just jump on the fire. Again, this is another picture of ancient fire temples in Iran that have been there for thousands of years. Then these are basically where people used to put a lot of fire and they would burn in here, and they would protect the fire. I think Abraham was made to walk into something like this, a temple, fire temple like this, and people were gathering around him, watching, hoping, seeing if fire actually burns him or not, because they had this belief that if you were evil, fire will burn you. But if you were righteous, if you were good, fire will not burn you. And obviously, in case of Abraham, Allah says, I told the fire to be safe and sound, so Abraham was not burned. So basically, all the people of that kingdom saw that Abraham was righteous and there was no evil in him. That's exactly what Abraham wanted. Prophet Abraham set that kingdom, set the people of that kingdom up for that practice, because he knew their practice. He knew they will call for a trial, public trial. He knew he would have an opportunity to do a good debate with the people, with the religious figures, with the king, and he knew that he would be put in fire to be purified, because the people will say, okay, we don't know if what you're saying, we don't know if you are truthful or not. We're going to throw you in fire, and if you are good, the fire will not burn you. But if you are evil, you're going to be burned in that. He knew the Zoroastrian element of that community. Because of that, he literally set them up for that event. This is another picture from current day Iran. You see that people are setting fire and they're celebrating that day. And some people, of course, that's not very smart. They try to jump out of or walk into these fires, which is really dangerous. The same here, people are dancing and celebrating around the fire. The other evidence that I actually have talked about before, I have 2-3 videos about that. I will put the link down in the description so you can see it, is when the Assyrians came and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. I remember there were two kingdoms, northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. They took the people of northern kingdom of Israel, and where do you think they took them? They took them back to current day Iran. They settled them in what was known in northwest of Iran, in what was known as Media back then, Medes, the people of Medes. So they took them back and basically resettled them in those areas. Now let me ask you, Allah, Yahweh, our Creator, is talking to the Jews, to the Israelites back then. He's basically telling them that, hey, I brought you to the Holy Land. I brought your father from the Holy Land to what was known back then as Israel. You didn't listen to me. You didn't obey me. You were not obedient. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to deport you back to where you came from. Your visa expired. You have to go back to where you came from. So he literally, what Allah did was that they deported the Israelites, the northern kingdom of Israel, back to where they had come from. So that's what it was. And it was probably very well known back then. Allah did the exact same to the kingdom of Judah through Babylonian, basically deported them from Jerusalem back to where they had come from, to Iran, to the Elam. And now you should understand why there was such close relationship between the people of Judah and the kings of Achaemenid dynasty, the Iranian kings, because back then there was only 1400 years after Prophet Abraham. So they knew, the Iranians knew that the Jews are basically came from them, and the Jews knew that Iran is where they originated from, is where they came from initially. The implication of this is that the Israelites are technically of Iranian origins. We know for sure that Sarah and Abraham were Iranians, and we know that Lot and his wife were Iranian. So all the children of Lot and all the children of Abraham are Iranians. Therefore, the people of this region, both the Israelites and the Arabs, are initially of the Iranian origin. And that explains the fact that they look also very similar, right? If you look at them, they look very similar. Of course, there has thousands of years have passed, things have changed, but the Quran is so beautiful, so exact. Everything that the Quran says, there's a reason, there's a logic behind it. And if you delve deeper, you learn more, and Allah teaches you more. Peace and blessings to all of you, and I hope you found this video useful.